Hey y'all, welcome back to another installment of Conversations in Black. Conversations in Black is a space facilitated by Musings from the Lighthouse that brings together Black artists and cultural custodians who demonstrate a commitment to the liberation of Black bodies. My name is Carla Felicia Scaife, and I am the founder of Musings from the Lighthouse. As conversation partners, we enter into an agreement in this space. In this space, we are intentional about the way we communicate thoughts and ideas. We intend for our language to be as accessible as possible. So in other words, we want everybody to be able to understand what we're talking about. We demonstrate mutual respect by being active listeners and offering thoughtful responses. We try our best to refrain from using ableist language, which includes words and ideas that are offensive to those living with physical or mental disabilities. We try our best to refrain from using language that isn't gender inclusive. For example, instead of saying all men are created equal, we might say all people are created equal. And lastly, we affirm the right of anyone who participates to only discuss what they feel safe in offering to the conversation. We realize that we don't always get it right, so we are also committed to being accountable for the ways in which we impact one another. Here, we're committed to doing the least harm, and we care deeply about those who join into listening. So tonight, we'll be thinking about economic justice with Quentin Cox, and we'll let him introduce himself. But first, let's take a moment to center ourselves. So if you would, take this time to be silent and take in a few deep breaths. As we continue breathing, let us remember our intentions, the worth of our bodies, and the power of our stories. Ashe. Quentin, thank you for being here. This is your second time with us, so we kind of already know you, but would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. I think it's an amazing platform that you are creating here and cultivating, curating voices and thoughts that are important to our community. So thank you for this work and for all the work that you do. I am Quentin, and I guess, I still say I'm a colleague of Carla Felicia Scaife. We met through Vanderbilt Divinity School, but my work centers around issues of economic justice, and it's really thinking about this thing that we know as the wealth gap in the American society today, where we have racialized wealth outcomes. There's no other way to say it. And I would say that we have intentional racialized wealth outcomes that have been created and that are maintained by various systems and various strategies that we have in place here in this country. And as I think about my work in divinity school, and I think about vocation and pastoral or congregational leadership, I'm specifically interested in the ways in which the church, and in my context, the Black church, should be engaging this issue of the wealth gap. And what are the strategies, ideas, things that Black congregations might do to really aid people who are suffering under these conditions, suffering under poverty in this country?
Thank you for being here. We're excited to talk about that. Well, I am. All right, we have 5 questions to engage per usual. And if you have any thoughts, further questions, or if you need clarification on something, please feel free to leave a comment for you people out there listening at home. I guess we're all at home, but who's not on the screen. So our questions are as follows, and I'm going to read all of these. They're kind of long, but I'm going to read all of them first before we go through each of them. Question 1. What are 3 systems or constructs you have identified as gatekeepers of economic justice? Second question, you wrote that the Black community needed more than anger, more than well thought out articulations of our oppression, and more than white guilt to heal our trauma and facilitate liberation from oppressive systems of injustice and racism. I resolved that I would be more than a voice talking or shouting about the pain, that I would also be working hands and feet, putting solutions into action, building people. Can you describe your progression from theory to praxis? Third question, We know that pain is often a paralysis. What advice to you? What advice um, do you? What did I write here? What advice would you give to those who have a desire to do the work but can't seem to move? And can doing the work be imagined in a way that would accommodate varying capacities and manifestations of wellness or ability? Fourth question, doing the work is often exhausting. How are you caring for yourself during this time? And the last question, the work that you've been called to do, are you able to fit that into a statement that you are willing to share with us? So let's go back to the first question. What are three systems or constructs that you have identified as gatekeepers of economic justice?
Yeah, I love this question because if we don't give thought to what are the systems and what are the institutions that are in place today that are, I would say, perpetuating and maintaining racialized poverty, or more specifically, Black poverty in this country, then we'll never have a fighting chance toward eliminating or reducing or impacting this notion of Black poverty. So the three that come to mind for me are that I think are the most important are, first and foremost, what I would call multinational global corporations. These are the companies that many of us buy products from. Many of us work for these companies and institutions. And the reason why I say that they play a role in this gatekeeping process of maintaining unequal wealth in this country is because in many cases, those multinational global corporations do a number of things. Number one, they limit the ability for local businesses to grow, to become prosperous, and to meet not only individual family needs for, say, the owners, but also to sort of tailor their supply and their pricing toward folks who live in those communities. They don't necessarily provide fair wages for employees who work in those communities. They don't necessarily provide fair working conditions for employees in those communities. And of all, they don't provide the goods and services that folks need at a price that enables folks to sort of maintain their lifestyles, right? That at a price that's fair for them. Multinational global corporations are all about profit at the end of the day. They're not concerned about my well-being, your well-being, my ability to put food on a table, your ability to put food on a table. At the end of the day, they're worried about taking care of their shareholders or stockholders and making more profit. It's problematic. The second, and perhaps more easily seen or identifiable, I would say, is the banking system that we have in this country. Not only do the banks control what kinds of loans, right, are available to folks, they also determine who receives those loans, and they also determine what terms folks receive for their loans. So it's not, by accident, for example, that, it's more difficult for a Black person in this country to receive a loan to start a business than it is for a Black person to receive a credit card or perhaps a loan to purchase a home. But even when we talk about purchasing a home, right, we can talk about now the terms of what it looks like to purchase a home. In 2008, I want to say it was Countrywide Mortgage Company that was unfairly targeting African Americans across the country with loan products that were absolutely predatory. So much so, the Department of Justice actually took them to court and found them in violation of civil rights efforts because of their loan structures and what they were doing. So the banking system, not just in the Reconstruction era, after Black folk were freed from enslavement, not just in the early 1900s, but we're talking 2008, where the banking system is still behaving in this way that is both predatory and damaging to Black folk across the board. It's problematic. I would say closely related to the banking system for me, the third would be the housing market and just for the process of home ownership in this country. Home ownership is the number one way that the average person in this country builds their wealth. And so when we talk about this wealth gap that exists and we look at the strange numbers, oftentimes you hear a white person say something like, well, where's my wealth? You're claiming that I have all of this wealth that I've amassed, but I don't understand where this wealth is because I don't feel wealthy. And the reality is that home equity is the number one source of wealth accumulation in this country. And so when you have a countrywide mortgage company that is unfairly targeting Black people and Black communities with loan products that are, quite frankly, junk and predatory, and then those loan products turn into defaulted loans, not necessarily because the person who took out the loan was unable to pay or was engaged in some nefarious activity or poor behavior, but because the loan vehicle itself was a bad loan vehicle, right? So then you end up with an entire population of people that have now suffered this economic loss, and it is almost impossible to recover, right? So one piece of this housing market problem is around the process of buying homes, right? And making sure that folks have equal access, fair access, unencumbered access to buying homes. Here's just another tidbit around foreclosures and home buying processes, right? Every foreclosure at one point in time was an approved home loan. So think about that, right? Like if banks were really vested or really interested in every person owning their home and finalizing their loan, terminating it with a final loan payoff payment, then we wouldn't have loans that end up in foreclosure. But the fact that these loans were at one point in time approved, meaning they met some standard of approval within the banking system, and then they become foreclosures, is problematic in my opinion, right? Now, the second problem that we have relative to the housing market, and Nashville is a great example, is this issue of gentrification. And really what gentrification boils down to is land values that are being controlled and manipulated by city governments, I would say, for the purpose of enriching some and keeping others in poverty. And so what you have over time is you have governments that you have tax assessors, right, who go through neighborhoods and they determine the value of property. They determine what your home is worth, what your home is not worth. They determine what communities get what kind of tax funding for roads, for streets, for schools. All of that sort of stuff is maintained and managed by the tax assessors or by the government, right? And so when the government comes in and says that the value of your properties are really, really, really low, for decades, and then come in and decide all of a sudden now we are going to assess that the value of this same house that we've said has been a $40,000 house for the last 40 years is now a $250,000 house. And we're going to tax you like it's a $250,000 house as well. So now you have people who have tax burdens that they quite frankly just cannot afford. And nothing principally has changed with their property, right? It looks the same, it feels the same, it has the same number of bedrooms, the same number of bathrooms. Nothing has literally changed in this home other than the city government has determined that now the value of this property is more than what it was previously. And so folks are displaced. They cannot afford the tax assessment on the property. And so again, we find that folks end up losing their home property. But even if I'm in a location where I don't lose my property, if I'm in a location where the city has determined that the value of my home is lower than the value of homes in other communities, then I'm still in this place where my wealth is less. So I may have a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home that the city has determined is a $40,000 property, and another person may have a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home. And by the way, we can say the square footage is the same property in a different part of town, and the city says that that house is worth $300,000, right? So through all of these markets, through all of these processes, I believe that we have manipulation. We have intentional acts on behalf of governments, companies, banks, and institutions that work toward keeping the value of property owned by Black people to be very low, that work toward removing ownership of property from Black folks and moving it over to non-Black folks. That was a long answer.
Yeah, it was very descriptive. And I was getting ready to comment on that because had somebody asked me that question, I just would have been like, it's capitalism. But I guess, when we say words like that, or we just throw out concepts, it doesn't really get to the heart of, like what that means, what capitalism means, like on the ground. And so you being descriptive and naming specific things that are as a result of a certain system, I think that's very helpful. And it definitely makes it more easy to digest what we're up against. Yeah. So I definitely appreciate that and you being thorough, but I know you to be thorough anyway, so there's that. Okay.
If I can make a comment real quickly before your second question about capitalism, I think it's really important that when we hear these terms, that we do the work to go and understand what these terms are and what they mean. And I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but I'll give you an example. Right now, a lot of folks are saying that the Black Lives Matter movement is sort of rooted in Marxist thought. And number one, that's ridiculous. But number two, I've sort of challenged people when I hear that claim. And so my challenge is, well, tell me what your understanding of Marxist thought is. And more importantly, tell me what pieces of Marxist thought you're concerned with Black Lives Matter being aligned with, right? Because we have these emotional ideas, we have these, emotional reactions to these constructs that we don't necessarily understand. And then we begin to make decisions, right? Or judgments based on these big words that we really don't fully understand and can't conceptualize. So I think it's really important that we do the work and not just throw out words like capitalism when we have these kinds of discussions.
Yep. Thank you for that. It's definitely helpful, especially in this space where we all trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing? Okay, second question. You wrote that the Black community needed more than anger, more than well thought out articulations of our oppression, and more than white guilt to heal our trauma and facilitate liberation from oppressive systems of injustice and racism. I resolved that I would be more than a voice talking or shouting about the pain, that I would also be working hands and feet, putting solutions into action, building people. So from what you wrote, can you describe your progression from theory to praxis?
Yeah. For your listeners who may not know where this quote comes from or the context of this quote, it was a post I put on Facebook here recently, and I'm referring to the days following Trayvon Martin's murder and my process of reflection and sort of thinking through, what is next? What do I need to do? What do we need to do? How do we deal with this moment as a community, as a society, as a country? And so for me, one of the conclusions that I came to was, as this quote said, right, was that we needed something more than anger, more than well thought out articulations of our oppression, and more than white guilt. And before I directly answer your question, let me say that as I say we need more than those things, I'm not saying that we don't need those things, right? I just want to be clear, because I think some folks read that and they kind of thought, well, Quentin is saying that, Black people shouldn't be angry. No, that's not what Quentin is saying, right? Like, I'm saying that, yeah, I am angry. I am going to do the work to have kind of well thought out articulations of our oppression to hopefully appeal to those who might be willing to listen. And I'm okay if white folks are kind of dealing with some guilt at this time as we navigate through this trauma. But I also recognize that we need more than that, right? We need more than those things, because those things in and of themselves are not going to lead to the kind of change that we need to have within our community and in our society. So now to directly answer your question, which is, again, how do I describe my progression from theory to praxis? Interestingly enough, I have always had sort of this very practical side of how I see these issues. I can think back to even an undergraduate when I first felt a call toward ministry and began to sort of vision what ministry might look like for me and the community and that sort of thing. Every single piece of what I was thinking about, even at the age of, 19 or 20 or 21 years old, was a practical solution to real problems that people were facing. Because I grew up, living with and playing with and engaging in community where folks were suffering. And I knew at a very early age that unless we did practical things to change what people were experiencing, then what we were doing really didn't matter a whole lot. Well, that's my opinion. I shouldn't say that. That's just my orientation to how I have seen and understood the world around me. That if we're not moving towards some tangible change, some actual difference, then we allow people to continue to suffer in the ways that they've been suffering for quite some time. And so for me, most recently, what has happened, and in this moment with Trayvon Martin's death, was really sort of this call to action for myself. I was working in corporate America, and there you're sort of walking this line between what you can say and what you can do, and folks are always watching and looking, especially as a Black person and as a Black executive. And I just sort of determined within myself that I needed to do something. I have a responsibility to my community to do something. God has blessed me, economically, academically, intellectually, socially. And I knew that there were things that I could do to contribute to solutions for our people that was above and beyond just being hurt, just being disappointed, just being angry.
Can you say a little bit more about that word allow that you used? I think you were talking about things that we allow to happen or to persist. Can you say more about that? Because I don't think that you used that word just to use it. I think you used it intentionally. So I'm curious. I'm curious about that.
Give me a little more context of what I said. I'm sorry.
Well, you were talking about it in the context of like, I guess why it's important, to move, to act, whatever that looks like. And so in that context, you said allow, things that we are allowing,
Yeah,
I guess that as opposed to like things that are just happening. So
yeah,
I'm curious what you were thinking, in saying that.
absolutely. I think that we have a great deal of agency that we can wield. I think that as Black people, as a Black community, we have a great deal of power that we can wield. I think what has happened is that others outside of our community see and understand the potential of the collective power that we have. Others outside of our community see and understand the potential of our collaboration, whether it's economic collaboration, whether it's thought collaboration, whether it's social collaboration. Folks know that if and when we come together, right, there is power. You go all the way back to racial insurrections, right? You go back to Nat Turner. White people white people who were in power understood that if you allow the Black enslaved people to communicate together freely, to meet together freely, to have their own ideas freely, then you run the risk of them toppling over these systems that we've created that ensure our wealth and their enslavement, right? If you look at the civil rights movement, right, much of what the government did was to sort of undermine the efforts of civil rights leaders who are working to sort of create this collective voice, this collective body of movement toward progress. And so I absolutely believe that we have the power to sort of disallow some of these things that are happening to us, right? That collectively, if we are to begin standing up and pooling resources, and the resources could be our economics and creating our own businesses. The resources could be that churches begin sharing buildings instead of having separate mortgages that they're struggling to pay by themselves. The resources could be our collective votes, which reflect our voices, right? And taking those votes to the polls and then making change. That if we begin exercising that collective power together, I believe that we will begin to force change, right? We won't continue to allow some of these things to take place that have been taking place. And I think that for many of us, the thought process has been that in addition to our voices, we also need white voices to come alongside. And while I'm appreciative of any voice that will come alongside and trumpet our message and work toward our liberation, I'm an absolute believer that if we by ourselves lift our voices and pool our resources, we can see great things happen, right? It's why Tulsa was burned to the ground, right? It's why Rosewood was burned to the ground, because people saw the power that Black people were wielding in our communities. And they said, we don't like that. We're afraid of that. And so we're going to sort of undermine and destroy it. So I do think that we can disallow some of the stuff that's happening to us, but it's a matter of us sort of defining what our goals are, what our aims are, and then just agreeing to move forward toward those goals and aims.
I'm thinking about what you said about churches sharing buildings. And I'm thinking about, what keeps organizations from doing things like that. And that makes me think about Dr. Harris. I know you said you're taking one of his classes now, but he emphasized that we have to always be actively reimagining how we think about hierarchies of power and where we decide that it's going to be located. And so I guess the way that we have been taught that power should be, I guess, distributed, up here, and then everything else, kind of falls in line on down, how we have to challenge, I guess, that hierarchy and think about how a hierarchy that is not beneficial to us, and kind of think about the ways in which our ancestors distributed power and how those systems might have been a little bit more effective. And also considering that we come from communal people. And so the way that we imagine power is going to be different anyway.
Yes, yes.
So,
Yeah, I think those are all extremely important points to sort of recognize. I think one of the trappings that we have fallen into as a people, right, is that we have sort of taken on the attributes of this culture and in terms of its goals and its aspirations, its values. And in so doing, we've sort of shed some of the values that were native to our people who were enslaved. So yeah, we were communal people. We were tribal people. There were matriarchs who led many of our communities and who understood a different way of thinking about the world than what we see from Europeans that have gone and conquered and colonized various corners of the earth. And if we allow ourselves to sort of re-envision, if we allow ourselves to rethink about power structures, as you've noted, there's great potential in power. I would go one step further and say, I think that if we don't begin re-envisioning what power looks like, we will always be on the losing end of this proposition. That
Yeah.
the American power structure is set up in a very specific way. And quite frankly, we don't have the resource to compete against others in this American power system and to try to win this game on their terms.
Yeah.
We just don't. We have 400 years against us in the effort to try to make progress. And so we have to begin, number one, decoupling ourselves from I just used the phrase this game. We have to decouple ourselves from the idea of this game and that we're needing to win or compete in this system. And then number two, I love the word you said. We have to begin being, imaginative about what a different way of distributing power might look like, what a different form of community might look like, what a different form of communal care might look like. And when we begin doing that work, again, I really think that we can see some change and liberation that our community needs and has never seen,
Yeah.
at least not on this soil.
I think divesting happens at many different levels, that's a process. And I like what you were saying about really, taking the time to think. And, that's hard, being in the program that you are, the worst part about it, on top of the fact that you're in a white academy, that's just that. But, having to really think and interrogate what has become a part of who you are. And, a lot of that includes picking at the foundation, which means, when you pick at the foundation, something's going to topple, something's going to fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so not really knowing what happens after the foundation has crumbled, if you're going to, still be there.
And it's particularly difficult when you've experienced some level of success within these systems, right? So when you've been in this sort of European power structure and you learn how to play the game to some degree, or you've been allowed to play the game to some degree, and you've been allowed to experience some level of success or prosperity, whatever you want to call it, right? It's difficult then to start critiquing that very system because that system you're bought into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're bought into that system because the system has bought you, quite frankly.
Oh, yes.
Which is why it is also difficult for non-Black people to sort of see and critique these systems. Right. I had a conversation with someone today. We're talking about this notion of privilege, and at the beginning of our conversation, you really struggled to sort of be okay using this word privilege and describing, what he had, I think over the course of our conversation, we were able to articulate that it's not something that you necessarily are wielding yourself. Privilege isn't a card that you take out when you're ready to use it, but that privilege is simply something that's happening in the air all around you. And just by walking, breathing, and existing, you're benefiting from it. And when you begin to think about that, these systems they just are the way that they are. And when you buy into them, it is hard to critique them. It's hard to separate yourself from them.
Yeah. It's difficult to critique what you are complicit in.
Yes.
We're all complicit in some way or another. So if anything, I think that's empowering to do it anyhow.
Yes.
So lots of thoughts, lots of things to think about. I'm still thinking about, how the game is, not having the resources to play the game in the way that it should be played, in a way that advances collective liberation. And I think part of that has to do with tapping into sources of our own power that we have been taught that are not actual sources of power, things that have been demonized, about us that, come up as part of, a retention, whether it be the way that we think, the way that we I don't like to, well, not logic, but different ways of working through things, different types of reasoning, different types of knowing, whether it's something in the body, whether it's through emotions or spiritual or whatever it is, tapping into those different kinds of knowing that are not really considered credible in the Western world. Um, so you've given me lots of things to think about.
Good, good.
Okay, let's move to our third question. I think this is actually my favorite question because it deals with the internal. And, so we know that pain is often a paralysis. What advice do you have to those who desire to do the work but cannot seem to move? Can doing the work be imagined in a way that would accommodate varying capacities and manifestations of wellness or ability?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question because we're all experiencing these systems in very different ways. And as such, these systems are affecting our persons in very different ways. They're affecting our bodies in different ways. They're affecting our minds in different ways, our emotions in different ways. And it may be that I have a different ability or capacity to engage this work at this point in time in my life than another person. But I appreciate this notion that even though I may not be able to engage in the same way, is there something that I might still do or be able to do to sort of contribute to this effort? And I would say, yeah, I would say that I think there's a wide spectrum of things that need to be done and that can be done. You mentioned the word complicit a moment ago, right? And you said that we're all complicit to some degree in these systems and in this stuff that's happening in the world around us. And so maybe I'm not at a place where I'm ready to go and start programs or go to Capitol Hill and advocate for new legislation or go work to put solutions in place. Maybe I'm just starting at the place of examining my own complicity, right? Trying to understand what are the ways, where are the ways, where are the points that I am complicit with these systems, right? Where are the ways that I, as a Black person, am embodying white supremacist ideologies? Where are the ways that I, as a Black person, need to do my own work around understanding and seeing these systems for what they really truly are, and then making a hard decision to begin doing some actual work toward the dismantling of those systems, right? So to your point, there is this sort of internal work that I have to do as well before I can really be effective in doing the external work that looks to change the systems. If I don't begin with sort of where am I, who am I, how do I present myself, and how do I try to perform in these systems within these systems, then I will have no effect in dismantling the system itself or changing the system itself. So I do think there are a variety of ways that folks can show up. I even think institutionally, as I think about Black churches, I understand that there may be some Black churches that might be very vocal and very active, right, and very much out on the front lines trying to push for example, legislative change or other sort of very formidable changes to these systems or the dismantling of these systems as they exist. And I also recognize that there may be other churches who say, well, that's not really what we know to do or we feel called or led to do. What we want to do is we want to help feed poor people today, right? And guess what? We need both of those, right? So I need to make sure that people who are impoverished today and don't have food on their tables, I need to make sure they get food today because my legislative policy changes are not going to feed them today because it may be 2 years or 3 years or 10 years before those policies actually change in earnest and meet the needs in the way that I want them to meet the need. And so I would say that absolutely there is a diversity of work to be done. Absolutely, there are a diversity of points of entry to this work. There are a variety of callings, I think, to this work as well. I think when we get to a place where we think that there's only one way to do this work, then we are problematic. I think when we begin telling other people that the way that you're doing this work is not right or is not good or does not work or is not helpful, then we are now standing in a dangerously judgmental place that serves to undermine all of the work that needs to be done. Because again, I think it's going to take many ways, many roads to get to the place of economic liberation.
Yeah. You talked about some churches being out, having the resources to be out on the front lines, and then other churches having the resources to feed people. And I would even take it a step further. If you don't have the resources to, to do things like that, at least you can do is, stop telling your congregation that they have to give their rent money for them to be blessed.
Listen,
You know,
listen.
The least we could do is interrogate,
Now
our
you meddling.
theology.
Now you meddling, Carla.
But, that's what I do best.
But even in that, right? So even in that, while I am here for that critique, I also recognize the place where that behavior comes from.
Hmm.
Right? It comes from the same place of, this Black church could not get a viable loan to create their building, to start their ministry. And so they're in a horrible loan product where they're almost upside down in this thing. And so the same systems, right? The same institutions that are abusing and taking advantage of Black people are also taking advantage of Black institutions and systems in this country. And so some of the behavior that we see in, Black churches or colleges or wherever it is that we may want to critique what's happening in our Black institutions, I'm a big fan of sort of tracing the line back to where did this behavior come? Where did this behavior start at? Right. And how do we deal with those issues? Because if we don't deal with those issues and we just scandalize the Black people who are engaged in some behavior that we think is not good or acceptable, which, by the way, we typically use the white ruler standard to determine if Black behavior is good or acceptable, right? Which I would say is problematic. But if we're going to look at that behavior, I think first you got to look at, what's the motivation for the behavior? Because if we're not asking those questions, if we're not interrogating those questions, there are 6 Black mega churches in the in the city of Dallas, Texas, right? Some of them are very famous. You know their names. If I said their names today, you would know their names. They were all built within, I want to say, a 3 or 5 year time period of each other. They are massive buildings. Not a single one of those 6 churches was able to get a loan to do their construction project in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. You have 6 Black congregations, existing ministries that have been around for a while, great financial histories, no problems, et cetera, et cetera. Not a single one of them can get a loan to build a building from a lender in their own state. Each one of those ministries had to get loans from out of their state in order to build their building. And they all effectively got payday loan mortgages in the same way that Countrywide was providing payday loan type mortgages to people to buy homes. And so those churches then are now saddled with these great visions and what they believe God has called them to do. And I'm not here to critique any of that or question any of that, but that then is being anchored by this massive debt over here. And not just the debt, but how this debt is structured. And so yes, I'm here for the critique, but I'm also here to say that we need to investigate and interrogate sort of how we got there.
Yeah. And it's hard, because it makes us have to shed some things. And like I said before, it should be toppling.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets us back to this whole notion of, right, so why do we need to have 6 independent church buildings, right? Is there a model that says that our churches can share space together, right? If we say that the church is only used, 1 day a week or a day and a half a week, Sundays and then Wednesdays, why can't my congregation meet on a Monday in the church building instead of a Sunday or a Saturday or a Wednesday? Can we begin to imagine something different? Again, pool our economic resources and leverage some power.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, the power thing and where we located, how we've been taught. And, we're afraid that if we give up power, then, we'll be powerless again. But within this system, within white supremacy, we have to give up that illusion of power so that we can have agency. Because, there's a difference between agency and control, I think. Well, control in the context of white supremacy.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But that also takes a lot of work because you got to be able to trust that it's going to be okay. And that's difficult to do too, especially, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just because, not that their scarcity is a thing for real, but considering that, the resources are being held, away from people, that is the fear is valid because, retaliation happens when we come together.
Yeah. So I was going to comment on you mentioning sort of trusting that it's going to be okay. And so what has happened to us is that we have been taught to trust these systems that have historically misused and abused us rather than trusting one another.
Yeah.
Like that's fundamentally the problem here, is that I don't trust you that we can have, 2 ministries in the same building. right? Because I'm fearful that you're going to be dominant or have control or power, and you're fearful maybe that I'm going to be dominant, have control and power. And so instead of us being able to trust one another and work together, I'm willing to trust this banking system, which is, screwed us over since, the mid 1800s.
Yeah. And that may be the case. It probably will be a situation where somebody's, dominant and trying to take over. But I think you still have to be willing to interrogate why that is. And we have to be able to, or we have to figure out how to come to a place to be able to engage in some real conflict resolution, because, that trauma exists in all of our bodies. And that's something that we have to figure out how to work through collectively.
Yeah.
Because I don't
Yeah.
think all trauma can be worked out, individually in isolation, but some stuff only can be worked out in the community.
I would agree with that. And so again, in my work and my research, it's sort of centering on this idea of what role should the Black church have in doing some of this work. And I think that there are a number of ways where the Black church can sort of model this behavior, where we can model as an institution what it looks like to be collaborative. We can model as a Black church institution what it looks like to pull resources, right? We can model what it looks like to defer my own needs or my own wants or my own vision for the benefit of a collective vision or the collective needs, the collective wants, right? So I think that's where, again, I love this word imagination. That's where we have to begin being imaginative around what solutions look like. We have to begin being imaginative around what this work looks like or what it could look like, always with a mind toward this notion of liberation. What does it mean for us to be liberated? What is it going to take for us to be liberated? And how do we commit ourselves to doing whatever is required to get that?
Whatever is required to get back. I love that. Okay, let's move on to the next question because we'll stay there all night. Doing the work is often exhausting. Speaking of which, how are you caring for yourself during this time?
Whew. Can we skip this question?
No.
You know what? When I saw this question, I was really appreciative that you put it on here, because it's a reminder for me, and I have to, publicly say, I'm not doing a great job at it right now. Personally, I'm balancing a lot between school and starting a company and starting a nonprofit that's seeking to do some of this work. And, I'm allowing some of this to sort of swing itself out of balance. And I recognize that. And so the truthful answer is I'm not doing a great job right now of caring for myself as I do this work. But if there's a but, I would say that I am more aware than ever of the need to, and I'm working toward putting strategies and partnerships in place to facilitate being able to care for myself differently and better than I have been. So thank you for this question. As much as I don't like it, I love it, because we all need to be held accountable to what is ultimately good for the collective, right? And the reality is that as much as I'm here talking about the collective good, if I'm not individually good as a person, I can't contribute to the collective good. So the collective good is just as dependent upon me being good to myself as it is me being good to you or anyone else.
Yeah. I have to push back on that just a little bit. Well, not push back, but I think I'm probably an idealist, but I would say that even if you are not able to contribute in a way that's good, because you may not be good, I guess my vision for the community is to be there's enough of people who have reached a certain level of health or wellness or however you want to imagine it, that can, pick up the slack and aid you in getting to the level of health that you are willing to consent to getting, because I think also I've been thinking about this. So there was a story, Jesus said, do you want to be made well? Jesus didn't just do it, and I think that consent is important because I think that for one, it doesn't mean that person, like you can look at a person, you see that they might be in a state that's not what your idea of what a person should be is. But they might be happy with that, and they should be allowed to be happy with that, and they're not less of a person, they're not less valuable. But Jesus said, do you want to be made well? And when that person said yes, it's like, okay, well, cool, we can go ahead and do it, that consent. And so that probably has something to do with something else. But I'm just thinking about that, in relation to, disability theology and just different things. But I think that even if you are not focused on, that self-care thing in the way that I asked, I think that you have the consent to say whether you want to do it or not. So
I appreciate that. And I appreciate that understanding of that text, because I think I have heard that text communicated in such ways that we would suggest if the person said that they did not want to be made whole, that would be a faith issue. The idea being that really I'm not asking your consent. I'm just asking if you will believe that I can do. And so to think about that text in terms of consent, I think is extremely powerful. So thank you for that.
thank you. I think it also it forces us to reimagine how we think of wholeness and what that means. Because everybody is able in different ways, and part of that work requires us to decenter a certain way of being or a certain kind of ability. So that's part of, I guess that's the beginning of my process right now. I haven't been in that for a while, but I'm in the early stages of that thought.
I look forward to hearing more.
Me too, as I let's see, last question. Oh, no, before we get to the last question, would you like to say a little bit about your nonprofit?
I would love to. So I am working to launch a new nonprofit called the Center for Urban Economic Justice, that will really spend, its efforts working around this issue of economic justice or economic liberation, as I like to think about it. And by the way, I should note that when I talk about economic liberation versus justice, right, I think that, to me, justice is about the systems that we use. It's about having, fair or right systems that work toward fair and equitable ends. I think that we can have these notions or ideas of freedom and still not really be wholly free. We can talk about financial freedom, for example, or I can be debt free, but I can be debt free and still not have total freedom in my life. And so when I talk about liberation, I'm talking about liberation not just from a condition, but from the systems that create the condition as well. And so for me, as I am thinking about this work in my nonprofit, it is about how do we accomplish economic liberation for Black people in this country. And I think that there are 5 elements that I'm committed to and committed to doing work around. The first is around sort of training and education. And that could be anything from how we manage our finances, to how do these economic systems that rule our lives actually work, right? Let's talk about terms like Marxism and socialism and capitalism and what they really mean, not what the propaganda has said that they mean. How do we understand ourselves in the context of these economies? The second piece is around beginning to divest, right? So what does it mean to stop allowing ourselves to be mistreated by systems and institutions that historically have done harm to us and that show no intention or inclination toward reducing or eliminating that harm? If you're not going to change and you continue to mistreat me and I continue to allow that, then I again have become complicit with that. And so for me, there is this idea that suggests that perhaps we begin divesting from these institutions that do us no harm. The third piece of the work for me is then around imagining. How do we begin imagining alternatives, right? So if we're divesting from systems, some of those systems, while they do great harm, they offer some benefit as well, right? So we talk about the banks and how horrible they are. They also provide me with the ability to sort of exchange and make payments, et cetera, et cetera. So if I'm going to divest from a banking system, I feel like we then need to also imagine what it looks like to then have that exchange process still available to folks in their lives. And so how do we then begin doing this imaginative work to think about alternative systems from those that we're divesting of? The fourth piece of it for me is around incubation. So how do we now inspire, plant, seed, grow, fund businesses within our communal context that create an economy that serves our community well and that does good for our community and that does the least harm toward our community. And the fifth piece is around legislation. So how do we at a state level, how do we at a federal level identify harmful legislation, get it overturned, rewritten, removed, whatever needs to happen? And then how do we also work toward the creation of helpful legislation to govern our communities in a way that does not perpetuate Black poverty, but that eliminates Black poverty? So that's what the nonprofit's about in total. Our first program, I'm super excited. We just went through interviews. We received 40 applications from young people, high school students, for our RISE program. RISE is a 16-week entrepreneurship program. It is a free program offered to Black and Latinx students that effectively teaches them how to start their own business. And we take them from, generating an idea that will meet a need within their community, all the way to having a product or a service that they are literally offering to actual customers by the 16th week. So we're launching our first cohort this coming weekend. We have our parents meeting and kickoff, and I am just super excited. We are still raising funds, so if I could, shamelessly plug, if people would like to donate toward that cause, they can certainly reach out to me, and we can talk about how to make that happen. But I'm very excited. It is the first step of the 5 that we ultimately want to accomplish.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Well, looking forward to seeing how that grows and the impact that the organization will have on the community. We expect big, good things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Final question. The work that you've been called to do, are you able to fit that into a statement that you are willing to share with us? Side note, this could be a thesis statement.
Yeah. So if you'll indulge me, I'll give you the 3 bullet points that temper how I see myself in this work that I feel like I'm called to do. The first is I feel called to support and uplift Black people, period. I oftentimes think of Muhammad Ali and his voice and the ways in which he used his voice to uplift Black people and to reaffirm and to reassure Black people of the greatness that is within us, that is inherent in us because we are created beings by a divine God. That's the first thing I feel called to do. The second thing that I feel called to do is to stand against ideas and ideologies rooted in white supremacism. And those ideas and ideologies may be from institutions, they may be from white people, they may be from Black people, they may be from anyone, right? But I think when those things are spoken or shared, I have within me this thing that cannot easily let it just go by, where I feel a moral responsibility to call it what it is and to address it, even if it doesn't stop, even if it doesn't get changed, naming the thing what it is. The third thing that I feel called to do is around community. I love community and specifically Black culture and Black community. And, much of this work around economic justice for me really centers on seeing the pain and the harm that I've known most of my life from either my own experience or the experiences of those in my community that I've loved, seeing that pain and harm reduced. And I think that economics and education are 2 of the keys for that reduction of harm. And this is the element that I feel called to engage at this point in time in my life.
I definitely bear witness to your commitment to community. So I'm, for the last, two or so odd years, I just remember that if it wasn't for you, like, Black seminarians wouldn't have gotten together. I mean, our incoming class wouldn't have gotten together. So.
It wasn't just me. We're all in this together.
I mean, yeah, but at the same time, you pushed and you pushed and you pushed. And so yeah, I think you played a huge role in the bond building. I think that you definitely acted as a facilitator. So I definitely appreciate it, because I don't think that I would have had the relationships that I did if you did not, step up and do that.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on this evening and talking with me about, what you're passionate about, what you've been thinking about, your work, you know, your inner world.
Yeah, I love what you're creating here. You know, you know that I'm a fan of yours, your voice, your musical voice, but also just um, your wisdom. You know, the voice that is an extension of your thought and of your essence have been deeply meaningful. It's been a blessing to have an opportunity to sort of watch it evolve and grow over these last, 2 or so odd years. I really appreciate this space that you're creating. And that at the same time that you're creating this space, you're also creating opportunities for others through the space that you're creating. So, and since we talked about it before, I'm just going to mention it publicly to kind of help hold you accountable to it. I think that we need to have one of these sessions where someone's talking to you and listening to your thoughts and the work that you're doing, because I think it's extremely powerful and important. So I just want to put that out there.
Appreciate the accountability. You got to have accountability in community for it to work.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. So can you tell us about where to find you or anything else related to your work that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I think on most social media, you can find me at the username Quentin, Quentin Cox, Cox. And Facebook is where I'm most active. And I'm beginning to sort of launch some of the other pages to correspond with the work that's being done as well. So, but Facebook is where you'll find my voice most loud and most consistent.
Tell us about the services that you've been offering.
Wow. So I do a number of things. Most recently, a door has been open to do some equity, diversity, and inclusion consulting. And so we're working with a company. We're building a company that is providing this service to an organization here in Nashville, a tech company, and look to do that for other folks. But I think what you're actually talking about probably are sort of my media services. So between photography and videography, I think I shared a little bit, but this video work for me has become this labor of helping Black folk to tell our stories and to own our stories, to own our narrative. Because whoever tells the narrative, whoever tells the story, shapes and controls the hearts and minds of a society. And for far too long, our stories have been told by people who were intending to shape the hearts and minds of society in a particular way, a way that was not good, healthy, or helpful for us. And so for me, this media work is around how do we take back our own narratives? How do we take control of our messages, tell our own stories in ways that are liberative for us, but not just tell our stories. The other piece of it for me is how do we then capture and house those for future generations? The Bible, talks about that there grew a generation who knew not our God or what our God did for us. And so my aim is that generations to come would have no reason to say that they didn't know about the struggles of their people and that they didn't know how God showed up with us, for us, and on our behalf in the midst of those struggles. So I love it. I love it. It sort of came out of, really, I was looking for a hobby. It was to be my self-care. So a year and a half ago, I recognized then that I needed something to do with myself that was not so intense and structured and whatnot. And so I took a class at Vanderbilt and started carrying my camera with me almost everywhere that I went. And over time, I grew it into something that was less about my care, although it really still is, because for me, like helping people to tell their stories, it is meaningful, and it is a way of kind of care and nurture to my own spirit. So in that way, it is self-care.
I hear you. Thank you for helping us reclaim our narratives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, thank you for this space and for this opportunity to share. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I think we've hit it all. Everyone out there, if you know someone who you think needs to hear this, of what we've talked about, don't hesitate to hit that share button. Also, don't forget to like and follow our page, Musings from the Lighthouse. I've definitely enjoyed being in conversation with Quentin as we talked about economic justice and, more, not everything, but a lot. Well, yeah, everything that entails, in the space is complete for now. It's complete for now. But the conversation is always continuing. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Amen and ashe.
All right, we'll see y'all next time.